Okay, any questions? If no, let's continue. Okay, I've just mentioned that there are 5 essential elements for contracts, right? Offer, acceptance, and then consideration. Here we have consideration. So consideration, what does it mean? It means something of value to the bargain. So it could be money, it could be some goods, it could be some services. So money, goods, or service. As long as they have some value, okay, then it could be a consideration. But consideration is not an essential requirement for a contract made under seal, such as a deed. So for most of our contracts, we need to have this element in place, consideration. But in some cases, it doesn't need to be in place. For example, a deed. What is meant by a deed? A deed is commonly associated with transferring, conveyancing, transferring a title to property, say sale of a property, of a unit, a flat. Then this deed is a written document transfer the title, that means the ownership of an interest in real property to another person. So often requires a deed. And in that case, consideration is not an essential element. Okay, so you can learn more by studying this term deed. Okay, conveyancing, property transactions, land transactions. Just another example. Then the 4th element, intention. Promises between the promisors and promisees need to take place between individuals or between companies. But these parties need to have certain intention to make a contract. For social agreements, for example, between 2 family members, say the father and mother, and between a promise between the father and the son, could be a social agreement. In that case, is not intended to be legally bound. Okay, so beware of this kind of agreements, social agreements. Then in such a case, have no legal consequences in case the promise is not realized. Okay, because that is regarded as a social agreement rather than a contract. Okay, but agreements on a commercial nature is presumed to be having the intention of legally bound. So if there's an agreement between 2 companies, for example, 2 companies are commercial organizations, they have commercial nature, then it is presumed that the agreement is intended to be bound legally. It's very different from a social agreement between family members. Okay, because family members are not commercial in nature, but companies, organizations are commercial in nature. The 5th element, contractual capacity. Both parties must be able or qualified to make the contract. So we have party A, party B, right? In case one of the parties is without a valid contractual capacity, examples like a party who is mentally disordered, okay, has mental problem. Even though that party has signed a contract, that contract may not be valid. Understand? Okay, because that party does not have the capacity to make a contract. Okay. Another example, the party under the influence of drugs or alcohol, a drunk person, right? A person who drank a lot of wine and then totally unclear in his mind, but signed a contract. Okay, so it's under the influence of wine. In that case, it's alcohol, but also could also be drugs, pills, medicines. That is another example. Third example could be the guy who is not an adult, is under 18 years old, right? Sign a contract, that contract is not valid. Okay. So contracts made by incapable parties, not legal documents, not legal contracts. Okay, this is the fifth element. So only when these 5 elements, accepted, offer, acceptance, intention, contractual capacity, although deed does not require this consideration, but usually for all other types of contracts, usually they need to have these 5 essential elements in place in order to be valid, effective contract. Okay, then now we look at each of the 5 elements in more detail. The first element, offer. Because in practice, in reality, there are lots of disputes between the contracting parties. And the dispute could be on the offer itself, could be on the acceptance, could be on consideration, could be on capacity, and so on. So that's why we have to understand, for example, for offer, what are the key things we need to observe? Offer may be made in writing. Of course, signing a contract, the contract in written form, it is in writing, right? Could also by words, right? Words, okay? And could also by conduct, behavior, act, okay? Now take the example I quoted earlier. You go to a supermarket, right? To buy a can of Coca-Cola. Do you need to sign anything in writing? You don't. But still, you are making a contract, right? It's by conduct, right? You take that can of Coca-Cola to the cashier, you pay, cashier accepts your payment, right? Then you make a contract. Doesn't need to be in writing. But either way, either one of these could lead to an offer. That is the first element of contract. An offer can be made to a person, a group of persons, or even to the whole world. This is talking about the offer. Is it possible to make an offer to the whole world? Is it possible? Not possible? Let's take a look at this video. Okay, see whether it is possible. Now, this case is very famous. Carlyle and Carbolic Smokeball. Right? Carlyle is a person. Carbolic Smokeball is the company manufacturing a kind of medicine in the old days, although a long, long time ago. But this case was a seminal case, very, very important case, illustrating whether it is possible to make an offer to the whole world, anybody. Okay, so it's a very short video which would explain to you the principle.
Carlyle versus Carbolic Smokeball Case 1893. In 1889 to 1890, many people were suffering from influenza and almost 1 million people died of it. So, a Carbolic Smokeball company made a product called Smokeball. It claimed to be a cure for influenza. The smoke ball was a rubber ball with a tube attached. The ball is filled with carbolic acid helium. The tube is supposed to be inserted in one of your nostrils and squeezed at the bottom to release the vapors. It flushes out aldehydes. The company published advertisements in the Pall Mall Gazette of November 13, 1891, stating that it would pay £100 to anyone who got sick with influenza after.
This is a key point. The company published advertisement claiming that it would pay, the company would pay £100 to anyone who got sick with influenza after using this product. So take this as a medicine to cure influenza. If you take this medicine, but you still got influenza, then you can claim the company to pay you £100. So this advertisement is to everybody who reads it, right?
Its product instruction. Instruction £100 reward will be paid by the company to any person who contracts influenza after having used the ball 3 times daily for 2 weeks. This is Louisa Elizabeth Carville saw the advertisement. She went to the market and she bought one of the smoke balls and used it 3 times daily for nearly 2 months. She used it 3 times daily for nearly 2 months until she contracted the flu on the 17th of January, 1892. Thereupon, her husband wrote a letter for her to the defendants, stating what had happened and asking for £100 as promised in the advertisement.
So they try to claim that £100 because they still got influenza, right?
The smoke ball company ignored 2 letters from the husband. On the 3rd request for the reward, they replied with an anonymous letter that if it is used properly, the company had complete confidence in its product. This is Carlo Brother Connected Court. The barristers argued that the advertisement and the reliance on it was a contract between them, so the company ought to pay. The company argued it was not a serious contract.
So the company may argue that it's just an advertisement, right? It's not actually a serious contract.
The Court of Appeal rejected the company's arguments and held that there was a full binding contract for £100 with Mrs. Carlo. Reasons given by the 3 judges were: 1, the advertisement was a unilateral offer. 2, the satisfying conditions for using the smoke ball constituted acceptance of the offer. 3, the company's claim that £1,000 was deposited at the Alliance Bank showed a serious intention to be legally bound.
The reasons given by the judges. Number 1, the advertisement was a unilateral offer. This is a very important term. Unilateral meaning one way from the company to the public, anybody, okay? Satisfying conditions for using the smoke ball constituted acceptance of the offer. So the lady, Mrs. Carlo, used that smoke ball, right, for 2 months instead of even more than the instructions, 2 weeks, right? Constitutes using that medicine, meaning that what? Meaning accepting the offer, constituted acceptance of the offer. And the companies claim that £1,000 was deposited. Now, this is a further information. This £1,000 is what? The company said that they have put a deposit, £1,000, right? Put it aside, saying, now I have sufficient money for you guys to claim in case. For each case, only 100, but the company put 1,000 there. So the company is confident that not many people would claim. But in this case, of course, Mrs. Carlo has claimed that. So this is also information showing that the company is committed, is prepared, right, to pay. Okay.
Got an incredibly famous English phrase decided in 1893.
So as I said, from time to time, I would cite some precedents. This example is the Carlu case to help you understand the principle. Now, if without this case illustration, I just ask you to memorize an offer can be made to the whole world, then you may query why, right? But after reading or watching this case, you should be able to better understand the rationale, right? Why the judgment was made. Now, this is just a repetition of what I've just explained and also what the video has just illustrated, right? So you can spend some time to read this in more detail, right? Actually, the video has already illustrated the key facts and the decision held. Okay, for an offer to be valid, these are further things we need to understand regarding offer. It must be communicated to the offeree. A person other than the offeree cannot accept the offer. Okay, so if the offer is from Mary to Peter, it's not from Mary to John. Okay, it's only from Mary to Peter. Then anything happens under the contract should be between Mary and Peter, but not John, right? Because John is not the party, the offeree. Therefore, John could not accept the offer. Okay. Correspondent by an acceptance, there must be meeting of minds of the contracting parties between A and B. These two parties, A and B, should have their minds on the same thing, meeting of minds. A consensus is reached by the offeree accepting the offerer's offer on the same terms. So to help you understand what is the counter example. The counter example is we have cross purposes in mind between the two parties. Now here we talk about meeting of minds. That means the two parties must have the same thing, same deal in mind. Okay. But here the two parties have two different things in mind, cross purposes. As in this case, Bravo's case. In that case, a contract was made to buy certain cargo on a ship called Pianist. Okay. But unknown to both parties, there were two ships. Ship one, ship number two, ship number one, ship number two. Coincidentally, they have the same name, Pianist. This ship is called Pianist. The other one also Pianist. Okay. But party A may be thinking of this ship. Party B is thinking of this ship. Okay. Two different ships, but of the same name. The decision held by the judge. The plaintiff intended to buy cargoes from one ship from this ship, while the defendant, the other party, intended to sell the cargo from another ship. The names are the same. Okay. The plaintiff's action failed. Because what? The cargo on these ships may be 10 cars, right? The cargoes on this ship may be 10 refrigerators. But so just happened that these two ships are of the same name, but the cargoes in these two ships are different, right? So there were no meeting of minds in that case, cross purposes. Okay. So only if, say, for example, we have in fact only one ship, and that ship is called Pianist, and to both parties, they are thinking of the same ship buying and selling 10 cars through this ship, for example. Then there is meeting of minds. Understand? Okay. And for an offer to be valid, it must be distinguished from an invitation to treat. Now, this point is also important. An invitation to treat, meaning the inviter is willing to enter into negotiations, not prepare to be bound immediately. So one party may invite the other party to negotiate on something, on a transaction, a potential deal. Doesn't mean that that inviter is prepared to immediately bound by the contract. Okay. A response to an invitation to treat, the other guy respond to the invitation, does not lead to an agreement. Instead, it may be an offer. There is no intention to be bound in the following situations. So, what situations? For example, a tender. Okay. Our request for tenders is normally an invitation to treat. Maybe some of you have been working in the construction or building industry. You may have been dealing with tenders, right? So you call for tenders. You may invite tenderers, right? For example, to provide repair service for this classroom, okay? Say you may send invitation to 5 tenderers, 5 contractors, A, B, C, D, E, okay? So you're sending, inviting these 5 contractors is an invitation to treat. It doesn't mean that you must sign a contract with these 5 contractors, right? So similarly, in this case, this is the case in 1985. It was held that the request, if the request is made to specified party and, now this is important, if it is stated that the contract will be awarded to the lowest or the highest bidder, this will be binding on an implied unilateral offer. So usually when we call for tenders, we won't say the contract will be awarded to the lowest or highest bidder, right? You just call for, say, a price quoted from the contractor, okay? You won't say, oh, you would award this contract to the one who quoted the lower price or the highest price, okay? It was also held in the Blackpool case, 1990. If the request is addressed to specified parties, that amounts to a unilateral offer, that consideration will be given to each tender, which is properly submitted. Now, this happens quite often, right? The request is addressed to specified parties, such as tenderer A, B, C, D, E, okay? If they submit a tender which is proper according to the instructions, you need to consider these tenders, right? Because they have submitted according to your instruction. But it still doesn't mean that you must award the contract to all of them, right? You may have some evaluation scheme, scoring scheme in selecting the 10 tenderers you want. We have talked about using several slides. We're still under the first element, offer. Then how to terminate. Termination of offer. An agreement is made or a contract is made when an offer is accepted. But an offer will not last forever. It becomes ineffective in several ways. So when will an offer be terminated? It could be through revocation, by lapse, by rejection. Again, without looking at the subsequent slides, if I just give you these principles, you will find it quite difficult to understand. So what do you mean by revocation of an offer? Why does it mean termination of an offer? What does it mean? That's why we need to refer to some precedents, like the Rowlage case. Termination by the offerer through revocation. Revoke, right? The verb revoke, noun revocation. Offerer may withdraw an offer at any time before the offer is accepted. Before it is accepted, the offerer may withdraw the offer. So in this example, in this precedent, Grant is the guy offered to purchase a house from Rowlage. Grant is this guy, right? This one is the plaintiff, remember? Right? And defendant, right? Grant. Rowlage. Now, Grant offered to purchase a house from Rowlage. He gave Rowlage 6 weeks to decide on the offer. Before the 6 weeks were up, maybe say in the 4th week or in the 5th week, Grant, this guy, withdrew his offer. Okay. It was held that Grant was entitled to withdraw his offer because what? Before that 6-week period is ended. In the 4th week, in the 5th week, the offer could be revoked. Revocation. Then that means the offer is terminated. Okay. So Grant can withdraw his offer. An offerer could withdraw an offer at any time before it is accepted. Okay. Before it is accepted. This is the first principle, revocation. How about lapse? Termination by operation of law. Offer may lapse and thus be incapable of being accepted because of the passage of time. So if now I believe you may have the experience saying you are dealing with some quotations. Quotations may have the statement saying this quotation is valid for 1 month. This quotation may be valid for 3 months or valid for 6 months, something like that, right? So that is related to this item, passage of time. So if the statement in the quotation is that this quotation is valid for 1 month, then after that 1 month, this quotation, due to the passage of time, would no longer be effective, could not be accepted. Okay. So at the end of a stipulated time, but in some cases, it is not stated in the quotation. If no time is stipulated, after a reasonable time, then the offer will become lapsed. Then you may ask, what is reasonable? How to decide whether 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year is reasonable or not? Then we need to make reference to some precedents, like this case is Ramsgate, an attempt to accept an offer to buy shares. What is shares? In the stock market, you know, shares. Share price fluctuates all the time, right? Every day, every minute. In that case, it's quite obvious that if one party attempts to accept an offer to buy shares after 5 months, or definitely this is a long period, right? Share prices fluctuates all the time. 5 months must be beyond the reasonable period, right? So that means what? We don't have a fixed formula or a fixed number representing what a reasonable time means. but we need to refer to the issue, to the deal, to the situation, to decide what should be regarded as a reasonable time. Okay? Or in case of a failure of a condition. And that condition could be an express condition, could also be an implied condition. So we will come to this in more detail later, in a later lecture. Express terms, implied terms. Okay. Now here I give you a very brief introduction. Express meaning something, for example, in the contract, it is stated clearly. It is described very clearly in words, okay, in statements. Implied meaning some terms may not be written in the contract, okay? Even though those terms are not written in the contract, they still exist because they are implied, expected, assumed to be there by, for example, common practice. Okay? So, for example, if the contract requires the contractor to repair the projector lamp in case the projector lamp fails, then the contract may not have specified that the contractor needs to bring along a ladder or elevator platform to access the lamp at height. That is expected, right? That could be a common expectation that the contractor needs to provide a ladder elevator platform in order to repair or replace the lamp at height, even though that is not stated in the contract. That's an example of implied condition. Okay? Understand? Express is written very clearly. Implied, even though it is not stated, is not written, it is expected. Understand? Okay. So implied term that the car would remain in the same conditions as when the offer was made. It was held that the offer to buy a car lapsed when the car was badly damaged. Say you sign a contract in buying that car, but after a certain period, you find that the car was damaged due to an accident. So it is expected, implied that the deal would not be able to go ahead. That means the deal would no longer exist, right? Could not be completed. Termination by the offeree, that is the third way here, rejection. Made by the offeree. That kind of rejection could be expressed, could be implied. Okay, so you are given an offer, but you do not like the offer. You can expressly tell the offerer saying, "Oh, I'm not going to accept the offer." Okay, say you offer to sell me a car in 10,000 Hong Kong dollars. I may consider, oh, it is too expensive. I do not like this car. I do not accept your offer. That is express. Okay. Imply, which may take place variably. Say imply saying, I do not respond to you. I do not say whether I accept or not, but I do not respond. Or I buy another car instead. So it could be implied. Okay. Kind of rejection. An acceptance must be a mirror image of the offer. So must be a mirror image of the offer. Counter offer is an implied rejection. So what is offered must be 100%. Saying, okay, you offer to sell me the car in $10,000. If I counter offer saying, could you make it $9,000 instead of $10,000? Now then, on one side is 10,000, the other side is 9,000. These two are not the same, right? Then there is no mirror image. And my counter offer of 9,000 is in fact an implied rejection of the original offer, 10,000. Okay. Any alteration is made or anything added needs to a counter offer, and that would terminate the original offer. In this case, it's 10,000 original. Okay. So similar to this case, the Hyde case, the defendant offered to sell a farm at 1,000 pounds. The plaintiff said he would give 950 instead. It was held that this was a counter offer which terminated the original offer, which is 1,000. Okay. However, in some cases, the offeree may ask for further information, request for further information, and that request does not constitute a counter offer. So then you may ask, could you give me an example? Yes, the example is the Stevenson case. The defendant offered to sell the plaintiff some iron at this price. The plaintiff inquired whether he could pay by installments. That means he could pay, for example, this 40 cents in, for example, in 4 installments instead of in one go. Okay, installments, you know, okay, divided the amount into small bits. It was held that it was a mere inquiry for information, not a counter offer. So the original offer was not rejected because the plaintiff only asked for whether he could pay this sum of money by installments. Okay, it's not saying, oh, instead of 40, I would like to pay only 30. No, just talking about the way of the method of payments. Okay, then it's not a counter offer, and therefore original offer remains. This could also be common in real-world contracts. Conditional acceptance may be a counter offer, but that counter offer could be accepted, capable of acceptance. For example, X will pay 60K for Y's car if Y, the other party, paints that car in blue color. Say originally maybe the car is in black color. So X would like the car to be painted by Y in blue color. A contract will be formed if Y agrees to this condition. Say if Y agrees to paint it blue, then that is a conditional acceptance. It's actually like a counter offer, but that counter offer could be accepted in this case. Okay. Okay, acceptance. 2 important aspects of acceptance. Here, it's time also to share with you a video explaining so I actually handpicked, selected some videos that are not too long, but could explain to you the idea to enhance your understanding. Here is an example regarding offer and acceptance.
Hello, this is Simon Jackson from learnalert.com, and this video is all about contract law. Well, specifically, it's about the rules of offer and acceptance. So we're going to be looking at what is an offer, and what we mean by an invitation to treat, how offers can be terminated, and the rules on the communication of acceptance. First of all, let's just go back to basics a little bit, and let's just think about the formation of contracts. Are all agreements legally enforceable? They're not. Common sense tells you, for example, that if you agree to go out with their friends to the cinema and later cancel that arrangement, your friend is not able to start a legal proceeding. But how does the law distinguish legally enforceable agreements from other sorts of agreement? Well, there's four essential elements that we need to have for something to be regarded as a contract in law. And these essential elements are: number one, offer acceptance. Number two, what's called consideration. That means that both parties have exchanged something of value. Number three, the intention to be legally bound. And number four, what's called capacity. Well, we're looking today at offer and acceptance. Okay, so the person making an offer, just to make it clear, the person making an offer is known as the offeror. The person to whom that offer is made is called the offeree. And now, the moment in time that an offer has been accepted has got a special significance, because that's the first time the contract comes into existence, assuming the other essential elements are present. Until a set of promises, obligations, and rights, in other words, the terms of the contract, don't bind anyone. Once an offer has been accepted, the existence of the contract binds the parties to that contract and gives them legal rights against each other. Now, an offer can be made verbally, in writing, or even by contract. You can get behaviour that implies an offer. Although there's certain kinds of contracts that must be in writing to be legally enforceable, notably in English law, those for the sale of land, some leases. There are very many contracts that do not need to be in writing. So, what is an offer exactly? Well, simple, generally it's simple enough matter to identify where an offer is being made. Certain situations, however, that might seem to be offers at first glance, but are not regarded by courts. So, what do I mean by that? Well, there's something called invitations to treat. If I say to you, would you like to discuss the possibility of selling your car? And you answer yes, it's easy to see the first question is not an offer, it's merely an invitation to negotiate, with terms such as the price to be agreed for some later point. Now, a lawyer would describe this kind of question: would you like to discuss the possibility of selling your car? It's what's called an invitation to treat. In some situations, it may not be easy to see whether something is an offer, or an invitation to treat. So, what about goods displayed on the shelves of a shop? This is normally seen as an invitation to treat. In Pharmaceutical Society and Boots, the retail chemists were in dispute with the Pharmaceutical Society, who argued that certain goods on sales over the shelf were an offer which the customer accepted by removing the goods from the shelf and taking them to a till. Boots argued that taking goods from the shelf to an assistant at a counter was an offer.
This is a very common example. Say you go to a drugstore, pharmacy, right, or a convenience store like 7-Eleven, right? They have goods and products on shelf. In fact, putting the goods and products on shelf are somewhat like invitation to treat. Okay, so then you as the customer will pick the product from the shelf and then bring it to the cashier, right, and then pay for it. Okay, then if I ask you which action is actually the offer, or which party is the first party providing or making the offer, and which party is accepting the offer in a convenience store, let's say in buying sale of Coca-Cola. Is the convenience store, the cashier, or the customer yourself making the offer? What do you think? Who is the guy making the offer in such an example? Okay, the convenience store, the cashier. Please raise your hand. Because the cashier will tell you how much that Coca-Cola will cost, right? Okay, $5, $8. And then at the counter, the cashier, you'll pay $8, right? So if you think that the cashier is making the offer, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4, 5. But some may consider, say, you taking the Coca-Cola to the cashier and you pay $8 for that Coca-Cola. Are you making the offer? Raise your hand. No? Then who is making the offer? Only some of you consider the cashier, the store, is making the offer. So actually, you as the customer, you bring that can of Coca-Cola to the cashier and you pay $8. That moment, you are making the offer. The cashier taking your $8 is accepting your offer. Right? Interesting. But this is counter to many, the perceptions of many laymen. Right? They may think that the shelf, the Coca-Cola with a price tag saying $8 is somewhat like making an offer. And you as the customer, take it, you accept the offer. No. Okay? That price showing the product is just an invitation to trade. Invite you. Okay? Because you may pick this Coca-Cola or you don't pick it. But at the end, if you pick it, you bring it to the cashier, you offer $8. Cashier is to accept the offer on behalf of the shop. Understand? All right? So this is a very important concept.
Which the assistant is free to accept or reject. And the Court of Appeal agreed with that point of view. Lord Somerville says that although goods are displayed, it's intended that customers can go and choose what they want. The contract is not completed until the customer takes goods to the till, the shopkeeper or one of the shopkeeper's employees accepts that offer. Okay.
As I said, goods on shelves is an invitation to treat no. It's not an offer.
Same kind of idea with display of goods in shop window. That's an invitation to treat. Official value is that. Media advertisement. What about advertisement? Advertisements, even if they provide details of the goods, terms of any proposed contract and price, are normally seen as an invitation to treat. Look at a case called Partridge and Crittenden. But there might be a bit of an issue here with unilateral contracts. So unilateral contracts can, in the form of advertisements, can be something different there. Now, what do we mean by unilateral contract? Now, this
A unilateral contract, you still remember the Mrs. Carlyle case. Mrs. Carlyle and Carbolic Football, the influenza medicine case I showed you earlier.
is the kind of contract that involves the offeror making a promise to provide benefit when a certain act is completed. Most contracts are bilateral contracts. So both parties make promises. For example, I will clean your windows if you pay me £10. There's an offer that can be accepted, so a contract exists even before the window cleaning starts. Now, in a unilateral contract, there's only one person making the promise. If I advertise £20 reward, the return of my lost cat, for example, there might well be a number of people who will promise to try and find the cat and claim the reward, but there's no contract till the person is able to deliver the cat. Okay, so initially we just got one person making the promise. Someone is doing something which then forms and exceptions, if you like. Now, the leading case is called Carlyle and Carbonic Smoke Company, which is a precedent about.
This is the case I mentioned.
At the old 19th century. Smoke ball company were makers of this kind of medicine, which when inhaled, allegedly cured a whole range of illnesses, including influenza. The advertisement.
Okay, now I don't need to repeat this case, right? So I just want to emphasize the offer and acceptance elements which the initial part of this video has illustrated. Okay, it's time for us to have a short break. Okay, let's stop here
The defendant would pay out.
and continue after the break.